Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello. We got it? There we go. All right. So here we go. I hope everybody had a fantastic lunch. And if you still have the munchies, the concession stand is open. There's all sorts of cold soda and bottled water and lots of different kinds of candy for a little sweet treat if you want. So we're getting ready for our next presentation. This one is by Ken Rahmoeller of St. Louis, Missouri. This one is called Boneyards, Beyond the Fences. We're going to learn all about haunted cemeteries and such. Ken is a paranormal investigator and founding member of Monster Paranormal. He's a co-host on the A.M.O.K Paranormal podcast, and he participated in Missouri's Botanical Gardens Spirit in the Garden, which you can see on YouTube. Boneyards is a collection of fascinating stories and histories of cemeteries, graveyards, and churchyards. So I'm going to turn it over to Ken.
Okay, thanks everybody, and welcome to the Paracon. She said, my name is Ken Rahmoeller. Welcome to Monster Paranormal's Boneyards, Beyond the Fences. It's a parahistory lecture, so kind of bear with me. But before we begin, I need everybody to do me one favor. I need everybody to groan loudly right now. Perfect. Because you're going to need that throughout part of the presentation. All right, so before we begin, I'm sorry. Anyway, so let's just begin. One button. Hang on a minute. There we go. So your first warranted groan is coming up right now. Outside, folks are dying to get in. That's the perspectives of Boneyards, okay? But inside, they're all in a grave situation. Okay, how am I doing? Doing pretty good with the dad jokes? I was told I had to do that. I'm like, okay, I'll work on that one. Mouse working right here. My mouse working right here again. Where's my mouse? My mouse is gone. Uh-oh. There it is. Hold on, guys, it's broken. Okay, well, that was the second part. Okay, anyway, we're going to talk about superstitions. A great way to begin to talk about graveyards is to talk about superstitions. So, first one I found was hold your breath as you drive by to avoid breathing in the spirit of someone who has just died. Second one is do not count the graves. It may invite spirits to follow you. Another one is whistling in a cemetery attracts the devil. Number 4, it's bad luck to step on a grave. And folks have believed in these ideas for a long, long time. Well, how long? Well, let's go back. Let's go way, way back to when burials began. What's your prediction? How far back do you think burials have begun? Give me a quick number. Anybody? Just yell it out. 6,000? Okay, that's a good number. Would you believe 200,000 years ago? 200,000 years. Our ancestors, the Homo naledi, they were 4.5-foot tree-climbing Stone Age hominids, and they had curved fingers. Excavators discovered their remains were buried in South African Rising Star cave system. This is the first confirmed archaeological burial site. Of course, it's a picture on the left up there. Let's move forward a couple years, in 130,000 BC. Neanderthals were unearthed at the Shamdinar cave, which is located in Iraq. Recent discoveries indicated that some of the bodies were buried with plant medicines. Well, both of these people were buried, or they buried their dead with useful tools presumed to be for the afterlife. But the unanswered question for me remains, how did they know that? Who told them? I have no idea. That's why it's an unanswered question even to this day. Let's skip forward again. 90,000 BC. I think that was just a couple of days ago, right? The first intentional burial site was found in the School Cave near Kafzu in Haifa, Israel. The cave site included tools, ornamentation, afterlife trinkets. They even found food there. I still do find it fascinating as how the heck the archaeologists can find these things, these amazing treasures, but I'm sure glad they did because my presentation would have been really boring. Okay, we're moving pretty quickly now through time, and we've now reached 5300 BC. The oldest known sites of the Indus Valley civilization. They were discovered in the Bihurana and in Rocky Garhi, India, and the deceased were wrapped in shrouds and buried in wooden coffins. They found shell beads, ceramic pottery, and food at these sites as well. The Indus population was peaceful, thus there were very, very few weapons of any kind. They believed in a socially divided afterlife, but they were practical and insisted that the resources that they had were better suited for the living than the dead. The commonality discovered so far, even our earliest ancestors believed and believe in some type of afterlife, which is going to continue on into the future, even to today. 5000 BC, if you find a trend here, I'm talking about the major civilizations over time. But in 5000 BC, that was in Iraq and Turkey, the Mesopotamians. They were buried in covered pottery, and most of them were located basically under their homes. So they would bury them in their backyard or under their homes. But this tradition displayed, how important the family was to them. Mesopotamia, remember, included the Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and the Assyrian cultures. Each was distinct regarding how burials took place and their various beliefs and on their social status. Per literary accounts, they knew an afterlife existed and they generally called it the netherworld, which was just a cosmic yet shadowy type place that nobody knew what it was, but they just knew it was underground. The common description was, well, it was neither a place of punishment or reward. It was just another otherworldly destination that, that allowed the dead spirits to kind of hang out, I guess. "4000 BC, we're now in Egypt. The Egyptians mummified their dead, I think, as we pretty much all know. The pharaohs, the dignitaries, and the wealthy were placed in sarcophagi. They were buried along with their belongings and even their servants in pyramids and pretty impressive tombs. The commoners, or the subjects and the servants, they were all buried on the west side of the Nile. But they also included food, pots, clothing items, everything that might have been needed in the afterlife, including in all aspects of whether it was a pharaoh or a servant, spells and writings such as the Book of the Dead were painted or buried with the deceased to guide them to the boat that led them through the passages of the underground. Anubis would meet and greet, I guess, the traveler at the Guardian's Gate, and the soul would be judged in the Hall of Two Truths. If found worthy, Osiris would welcome the soul into the afterlife. If not, if they weren't good, they were just thrown into utter chaos and darkness. Okay, skipping forward to the next civilization, we have China. 2000 BC. The Shahuqi Cemetery, which is on the left, the photo on the left, it was created in Western China. It contains about 330 tombs. There are wooden figurines, masks, weapons. There's even boat coffins. It's like, I was trying to figure out what the heck why boat coffins? Well, the Chinese believe that the soul travels across first the bridge of helplessness, and they travel towards a place called Diyu. It's the underworld capital city. That's where the soul is judged and receives an appropriate punishment based on the severity of their wrongdoings. From what I read, they really don't believe in a hell, but they believe that everybody does wrong. So I guess in more modern day terms, think of purgatory, where you're being punished only up to a certain degree. And once you, I guess, get out of that punishment stage, then you move on, and your soul then must cross the river of oblivion, and that is to receive the ultimate reward. That's why there were wooden boats. I never realized that before. The right photograph, everybody knows about the terracotta army, I guess you call it. All the soldiers. Well, that was actually created in 200 BC. It was the Xi'an mausoleum of the first Qin emperor. It was constructed. That site is over 20 square miles in size. It contains over 8,000 plus terracotta warriors, and those are the protectors of the emperor. I think there's also horses and chariots and all sorts of crazy stuff there. But that's what that's all about. But that was all kind of part of the Chinese empire and the burial customs of that day and beliefs in the afterlife. Let's go over to 1500, the Greek civilization. They buried and cremated their dead. Pageantry, funeral pyres were very, very common. Graves were marked by tombs and columns and memorial statues. How many grave sites or graveyards have you been to where all of this is, you see this every day? You see the tombs, the columns, the memorial statues, the marble. We'll kind of get into more of that later, but it began a long, long time ago. Well, in the Greek civilization, upon death, the soul was led by Hermes to Hades. Hades was the ruler of the underworld. Charon, the ferryman, rowed the boat across the river Styx, but only if you paid him a gold coin. Hades then judged the soul to determine the reward or punishment. For those who were stuck, and actually anybody who died, Cerberus, the three-headed dog, was actually there to protect the underworld, not just to protect it, but to keep the souls from leaving and coming back to life. That was the whole purpose of the three-headed dog, which I think is pretty cool. Anyway. Let's move over to the other area, the Roman side. So 800 BC. The Romans also buried their dead. Most of them were or a lot of them, I should say, were in marble sarcophagi. Kind of sounds like the Egyptians, doesn't it? I think they stole a lot of ideas from the past. because they also had cremains. They buried their cremains in decorative urns. And most of those graves were found basically in mausoleums and catacombs. So you kind of see how things were kind of rolling through, the centuries and whatever, and how they just kept building upon each other. Well, the Roman afterlife beliefs were similar to the Greeks. However, the Romans were just deathly afraid that the dead would negatively impact their living or their living situation. So they were really fearful of the dead. The afterlife was considered a new beginning. Once you're gone, you're gone. You're never going to come back, but you're going to continue on, but you're not going to come back and bother us or anything. The good were rewarded with a peaceful existence in what's called the Isles of the Blessed, and the bad were cast into darkness and despair. Many deity played a role in the Roman aspect of the afterlife, and Pluto was the main leader, and he was the Lord of the Dead and the ruler of the underworld. So similar to the Greeks, but they just rolled everything into one, but they were really fearful of the dead. They did not want them to come back at all. And then we move into 750 AD, the Christian perspective. Early Christians buried their dead under churches, catacombs. We just heard about that a few minutes ago. Or in churchyards, also called graveyards. They were interred nearby families so that families could visit them. For over 2,000 years now, Christians believe that death is not the end of existence. The soul will be judged immediately after death, and the repercussions, though, are either eternal life, or joy in heaven, or utter torment and despair, and that would be in hell, what's called hell. All right, so a swift migration here. So for over 200,000 years, and you may laugh at this one if you want, kind of look at my word spellings up there. For about 200,000 years now, the human population has been fascinated with death and the afterlife. For the past 1,000 years, civilization has evolved. Customs have changed significantly. Or have they really? So how do we get from ancient historical burial sites to modern cemeteries? Well, of course, we use a segue. Historic transportation included carrying the dead, dragging them, carting them. What do we have now? Limousines. But the best transportation segue for this lecture transition is not the two-wheeled scooter as we know it, but it was the carriage that scrolled by a couple times here, because we're now heading into the 1800s. Okay, by the way, I wonder if gravediggers made their coffee from burial grounds. Oh, there we go. I got a groan. I love it. So please groan now. There we go. Okay. There's our segue. Burial plots associated with churches were known as churchyards or graveyards. If not, they were called cemeteries. Boneyards. I just love the name. I thought it was pretty cool. That's why I named it this one, but that just means a pile of bones. But it is a slang term for cemeteries. Most U.S. cemeteries in the 1800s were established near churches. They were part of it. This is a photo of the Bonaventure Cemetery in Savannah, Georgia. And it is it's a good example of an early 1800s graveyard. Because of population growth, aromas, the cholera epidemics of 1832 and 1849, eventually graveyards were forced out of cities and next to churches, and they were built or reopened in less populated areas. This is a good photo of what a church churchyard or graveyard look like. In the 1850s, Western civilizations established park and garden settings in rural areas, and they considered cemeteries to be family-oriented. Places of joy and rest. It was a good place to go on a Sunday picnic. The Victorian age, so the mid to late 1800s, also brought about elaborative decorative monuments. Why? As expressions of wealth. Leisure, notice the bench on the left side there, and the beauty, kind of on the right side. They're both found at one of my favorite cemeteries in St. Louis. It's called Bellefontaine Cemetery, and that one opened in 1850. It was our first major rural one. You know, when we speak of wealth and cemeteries, as I said, I really think fondly of Bellefontaine Cemetery, but it's also an arboretum. Again, it opened in 1850. Why? Because it was due to the 1849 cholera epidemic that just swept through. I think St. Louis itself, I think they lost about 20% of their population, roughly. But it was the first rural cemetery west of the Mississippi River. 314 plus acres in this cemetery contains hundreds of beautiful monuments, but none of them exceed the ornateness and the beauty of this particular mausoleum, which was erected in 1920 for Adolphus and Lillian Bush. Yes, the beer baron. This is their monument inside of Bellefontaine Cemetery. Now, I do want to point out that you see that little tiny building to the, I guess, to the left of it there, kind of in the background. We're going to talk about that one after a while. That one's called the Wall Mausoleum or the Wall Tomb, and I have a story about that one, but later on during the lecture. But this thing is just huge. Who else is buried in Bellefontaine Cemetery? Well, you guys remember the name William Clark? Lewis and Clark? What about, anybody know Rush Limbaugh? He's buried there. What about Confederate General Major Sterling Price? His tomb, very, very elaborate, is also here. I mentioned, I didn't mention today, but to somebody else earlier, Ellis Wainwright, the Lemp family, plus about 40 plus other beer barons. I do give a lecture on the beer barons too, but that's not today. But other dignitaries, there's even Civil War soldiers that are buried in Bellefontaine Cemetery. And I found out that there's over 87,000 graves at this particular gravesite, or cemetery. Now that we understand a little bit of history about cemeteries, it's time for some interesting stories about some of the oldest cemeteries, and I picked the 4-state region that we're associated with down here. And it relates to, a little prejudice here, but it relates to A.M.O.K, Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Kansas. And it kind of matches our paranormal podcast that we do on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m., right? Central Time. There we go. So a little plug there. Anyway, not just these 4 states, but also some other cemeteries that I've actually visited, taken pictures of, and researched. Yes, I'm what they call a taphophile. That's a tombstone tourist and lover of cemeteries, but I will say that I am not a koimetrophile. Definitely not that. That one is one who is abnormally obsessed with cemeteries. So let's talk about, let's start with the oldest cemeteries in each of the A.M.O.K region areas. The Skull, might be called School Cemetery, is the oldest cemetery in Arkansas. It was founded in 1778. It was originally known as the Arkansas Post Cemetery. Though most of the graves here have lost their, my heart's beating, sounds like. Anyway, though most of them have lost their markers, I found out that Historical Society and the courthouse records confirm that Pierre Laclede is buried there. Who is he? He was the founder of St. Louis and was buried there in 1778. Apparently, U.S. Representative Henry W. Conway of Arkansas is also buried there, and he died from losing a duel to Robert W. Crittenton in November of 1827. So like I said, I'm going to throw a few little weird tidbits out there for each of these. Let's move to Missouri. Now, you don't physically have to move to Missouri, but we're going to move into Missouri here. The oldest one in Missouri Cemetery is the St. Genevieve Memorial. It also was founded in 1778. One of the stories here is that there was a steamboat explosion that happened, it was called the J.H. Dickey, that happened near St. Genevieve in 1852. Many of the passengers died and were buried in the cemetery in a mass burial area. And it's kind of no wonder that the cemetery in the town, which was established in 1735, one of our earliest settlements, that's why there's an abundance of hauntings that occur in the St. Genevieve area. The Garland Cemetery, that's the oldest one in Oklahoma. It was founded in 1862. It's actually the burial site of Choctaw Chief Samuel Garland and his family. There's a memorial stone there that kind of offers a glimpse into their past of the Choctaws family and Choctaw history, which I found was kind of interesting. But that particular family migrated from Mississippi during the Choctaw Removal March, I guess you'd call it, of the 1830s. Samuel Garland was born in 1803, and he also played a significant part in Choctaw politics. He served as the principal chief during the Civil War. The tombstone of his mother-in-law, Sophia Pitchland, is also believed to bear the earliest known birth date in Oklahoma. And that date was December 27th, 1773. Move over to Kansas. The Topeka Cemetery is the oldest one in Kansas. It was founded in 1859. Charles Curtis, who happened to be Herbert Hoover's vice president, he's buried here. There's stories of hauntings that include, there's an elderly gentleman who stops to chat with workers, and then he suddenly disappears. There's a former office manager in the main building, the main office there, and he's often seen wandering the halls of that building. There's a house that's on the property, and there constantly is seen a young girl who's seen sitting up on the balcony or waving to people as they walk by. And right here, this picture here, this is a Mausoleum Row. Supposedly, one of the stories is that there's a disembodied lantern that just floats along at night along the row as if they're either working or kind of protecting or just kind of watching the area. Well, that was kind of an interesting story. The most popular Kansas ghost story, though, is about the albino woman who wanders the nearby, which is not too far from this one, the Rochester Cemetery, and she's looking for her lost child. This one's a crazy one. So I'm going to move into some of the places I've been. This is up near, oh my gosh, anybody ever hear of Ashmore Estates up in Illinois? Okay, it's a poor farm, but a few miles from there, there's a cemetery called the St. Omer Cemetery. It was founded in the mid-1800s. This is the tombstone of a purported to be witch. Her name was Caroline Barnes. Her tombstone, as you can see, is kind of shaped like a crystal ball. It sits on top of a pyre of stone logs. But notice the death date, her death date. The death date is February 31st, 1882. Of course, with that story, or with that inscription, plus the fact that the town kind of disappeared in about the same year, about 1882, a lot of rumors, a lot of stories going on since the 1890s, I'll say. But the local rumors claim that she was a witch. What's the story? Well, she was accused of being a witch in the 1880s, but she wouldn't die. They tried hanging her. They tried burning her. Never would die. So they say they buried her alive. And then they put the inscription out there of February 31st, so that on the anniversary of her death, she couldn't come back to life and haunt people, or haunt the people who were trying to put her to death. Well, here's the real truth. She died of pneumonia. She died of pneumonia. There's no evidence that even supports the witchcraft claims. There was no trial. There was no burning. There was no hanging. There was no burying people alive. It was just basically a made-up story. It's a cool story, though. But rumors are not. February 31st still bothers me a little bit. What about you guys? That's kind of a strange, very strange. Let's move over to Kansas. The Stull Cemetery the Stull Cemetery was founded in 1861, Stull, Kansas. Cemetery is best known as the Gates of Hell. The local lore says that on Halloween night, the devil appears in the graveyard and an endless stairway to hell opens in the earth. Sounds pretty creepy, doesn't it? I love that picture I found on the right side. I could use it because it was AI generated, so there you go, guys. But it's just so cool. Like, this is a neat story. My daughter went to Emporia College, and I would go out there for the weekends, and we would just kind of cruise the area looking for haunted stuff or cemeteries or just cool things to do. Spend the weekends out there. Well, we decided to go find this place. Well, driving around, we finally found it after passing it 3 times. That's how tiny it was, and it was right on the street. It's like, how the heck did we even miss it? Little tiny sign, it may have been a postage stamp, but we finally found it. Together we explored the graveyard and the cornfield, which didn't take us very long because it was really, really tiny. Conducted about an hour or 2 EVP session. What did we hear? We heard, saw, and sensed nothing. Absolutely nothing. However, we were excited that we finally found the cemetery and can say that, guys, we were there. It's been a couple of months, but this one was kind of interesting here. And I bet you're all dying to hear what I'm going to say next, right? I heard one moan and one giggle. Oh, you guys are tough. Huh? Boo? Oh, I couldn't hear the boo, so you got to be louder next time. So, all right, well, thanks. Anyway. All right, well, it's time to raise your spirits, okay, and chat about tombstones and monuments. But first, actually discovered this town of Frankenstein, Missouri. I'm sorry, Frankenstein, Missouri. Found it actually several years ago. And I'm thinking, oh man, how cool. We officially have monsters in Missouri, and they recognized it by giving it a town name. Nope, not even close. The community actually isn't, I was just there about a month ago. Matter of fact, Adrian, the boo guy back there, on my way home from the Missouri State Pen 2 weeks ago, I purposely looked for it and I found it. I got a couple of photos, but it's not very far from Jeff City. Anyway, the community is unincorporated, began to grow when a church was erected back in 1863. And in 1890, Gottfried Franken donated some land for a post office, and they ended up naming it Frankenstein. Why? It's a weird name for a post office. Well, the story goes that he actually donated a tract of land that became known as Franken Hill. And since Stein can mean rock, the town name may have been a way of honoring Mr. Franken for his donated stein or hill, and they just named the town Frankenstein. That's all I know, but isn't that a great story? All right, well, thank you. Okay, let's continue on here. The old burial point, also known as the Charter Street Cemetery, was established in 1637 in Salem, Massachusetts. I personally have not been there. Some of my friends recently, I guess back in the spring, they were out there kind of wandering around the countryside, but this particular one, it's the oldest European burial ground in the United States. Notable burials here include Judge John Haythorne of the witch trials, plus there's 20 innocent women who were accused of witchcraft buried there, and a guy by the name of Captain Richard Moore, who was a Mayflower passenger. Adjacent to the cemetery is a memorial of 20 stone benches representing each one of the women who were accused and executed of witchcraft. And it's stated that the memorial is meant to remind us that the past teaches us to confront our fears and prejudices with courage and compassion. So I think bottom line, I think it just meant, come on, people, be smart, use some common sense. That was a pretty tough time during that early days of the United States. I don't know if you guys recognize this one or not. St. Louis Cemetery, number 1, New Orleans. This one opened in 1789 as an above-ground burial site. Anybody know who's buried there? Go ahead. Yep, Madame Laveau, the Voodoo Queen. She's buried here. Folks swear that they see and hear crazy stuff and hauntings throughout the cemetery. But who was Madame Laveau? She was actually a spiritual leader, and she melded several traditions, African, Haitian, Catholic, and Creole traditions via her spiritual background of voodoo, and she served the people as actually a spiritual guide. So she was not a bad person. She was a healer. She was also a protector. Her voodoo belief was not dark magic. It was an empowerment of love, compassion, and understanding, which embraced the diversity and dignity and harmony of everyone. However, if you want to learn more about her, talk to your nearest librarian. I know one of them over here. So yeah, they'll give you more information. But you knew that one, but you guys know whose pyramid this is? Or pyramid, this tomb is? It's the future mausoleum of Nicolas Cage. Did you guys know that? He's still alive. He's still breathing and carrying on and making movies and I guess still looking for buried treasures. Yeah, he's in St. Louis Cemetery 1. Where is it at? It's near Madame Laveau's tomb. It's a 9-foot pyramid. It's inscribed with the Latin phrase, omnia ab uno, all from one. Nicholas is a paranormal enthusiast. Do you know he once owned the Lalaurie Mansion? Okay. I think he lost it because of some financial problems that he had. But some say, it's like, why this pyramid? Well, some say that he's affiliated with the Illuminati Society. Many more think that this is just related to the Egyptian belief of immortality. And the final rumor states that he believes he was cursed when he owned the Lalaurie Mansion. So why did he build it there? Because he wants the protection of the Voodoo Queen after he dies. Why did he really build it? Nobody knows. He's keeping quiet about that one. This particular monument, this is actually called a cenotaph. It's an empty tomb. It was erected in the Forest Home Cemetery in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it's a memorial to Joseph Schlitz. Anybody recognize that name? Schlitz beer baron? Well, the engraving, as you can see there, I zoomed in, it tells the story of his death in a shipwreck. The ship was called the SS Schiller. It went down in 1875. It happened in the Isles of, I think it was near the Isles of Scilly, England, and supposedly it was hit by 3 rogue waves. The waves crashed into it so hard that it tilted it, sunk it, and the boilers exploded. But his body was never found. I think of the 400 passengers, I think they said over 340 of them died. A lot of them never found his body, or never found their bodies. So his friends and family, what did they do? To memorialize him, they built this empty tomb in his honor. And like I said, it's up in Forest Home Cemetery in Milwaukee. It's an interesting place. I have been there. I think it was a year and a half ago. A friend of mine lives up that way. So we were cruising around looking at all the old sites that I talk about. This particular one, this is again the Bonaventure Cemetery, Savannah, Georgia. 19th century brought wealth, prestige, and glory to new heights, as depicted in this particular gravesite. Money was power. Lavish detailed tombs and monuments displayed the decedent's status and sometimes ego, always for future generations to see. But isn't that beautiful? I'm going to go back to Bellefontaine Cemetery again, this is St. Louis. These are a few examples of things I found there. The left one actually displays an antique Scottish clan badge. Not exactly sure who this is, but I just thought it was really cool. But the insignia on there says nil sistere contra, and that just means nothing to stand against. The lion represents God's protection. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, what's the bench represent? Taking a breather, taking a rest, enjoying the beauty. Note the intricate details of some of the grave markers, 1800s especially. Many of them tell stories, kind of like the one I just mentioned a moment ago. But the one here in the center is kind of interesting. This is the tombstone of Isaiah Sellers. It denotes that he was a riverboat captain. Even more interesting is the story behind it, is that he was a riverboat captain, but he was friends with another one by the name of Samuel Clemens. And apparently the pseudonym of Mark Twain was taken from this gentleman who was a very popular riverboat captain of the time. During my travels, not long ago, I found another cemetery. It was called Mount Mora Cemetery. This one opened in 1851, and it's located in St. Joseph, Missouri. The boom years of the post-Civil War period, known as St. Joseph's Golden Age, gave rise to the building of the finest tomb architecture in this particular area. It does rival a lot of other cemeteries. It's small. I said the 340-something acres was the Bell Fountain Cemetery in St. Louis. This one's about 40 acres, I believe. But a couple of the monuments here that I found were the Greek temple represents democracy, and the dancing crane symbolizes protection and a happy marriage. How that goes together, I don't know. But it was cool monuments. A couple more there were the stag. It represents piety and the victory over Satan. The pagoda in the background denotes friendship. I'm trying to give you some symbolism here too. The woman carrying the urn in the right one, that symbolizes mourning over death. And the obelisk behind her represents eternal life. The uniqueness of headstones it varies immensely everywhere, especially in the period of the 1800s. Look at these things. How intricately carved they are. And like I said before, these mausoleums, I didn't say this one, this is a different place. These mausoleums in Mount Mora Cemetery, this is Monument Row for them. And they represent the ultimate final display of wealth during the mid to late 1800s. It was amazing how wealthy people were in that era. So what about ghosts? That's what you're all dying to hear, right? That was bad. I just threw that one in just for grins. The age-old question is, are cemeteries haunted? I don't think they are. However, there are exceptions. They can be really scary, especially if you're out there at night. I don't recommend you do that because it's quite expensive, and you could end up in the Vertical Bar Hotel for a couple of nights, and it's very, very expensive. So don't do that after dark, unless it specifically says it's open 24 hours, which there are a couple of them. But there's some, I've got a couple of interesting stories here that I'll share. Remember I told you about the wall cemetery behind the Bush Mausoleum in Bell Fountain Cemetery? Within that circle there, because it's kind of hard to see, especially if it's bright, it's a close-up view. The wall mausoleum, there's a window in the front, there's a window in the back. I'm across the street. I took the picture of the Bush's tomb, and from that position, I zoomed in as far as I could, going through the front window and the back window, and I found later looking at it, there's two people standing there, and there's a horse. There was nobody at the cemetery that day when I'm driving around. So only thing I can figure out is, I don't know, maybe they were mourners or workers from the past. The place has been around since 1850. Actually, even before that, because it was a private cemetery before it was incorporated. Okay, same cemetery, but there's another one. This is the public cemetery, Bell Fountain. Calvary Cemetery is right next door. That was built in 1854. That's the Catholic cemetery, and both of them are enormous. They're just huge. There's a road that goes in between. And I'll let you guys read the stories up here, but there's some ghost stories. I know somebody was bringing up a story about, actually I think Jeff brought up a story about cemeteries and the boy. Well, this one has one, the most popular one is the hitchhiking ghost, kind of similar to Resurrection Mary up in Chicago area. But this hitchhiker likes to roam along Calvary Drive, which is about a half-mile long, and it runs in between the two cemeteries. These stories have been, all three of these stories have been documented, verified, and they're still told periodically by the police and the police department that is near, not too far from there, about a half-mile from there. And nobody knows why they're still happening, but occasionally there's a documented proof that, a woman was walking along, picked up, got dropped off in front of the cemetery and disappeared, or a boy walking around and runs out in front of traffic, and when you slam on your brakes, there's nobody there. Potosi found, took a photo of that. That's one of the oldest cemeteries in the area, 1833. You see a man leaning up against the post there? But not all cemeteries are for humans. I saw an article about Stephen King, Pet Cemetery, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's the oldest cemetery? 1896, Pet Cemetery, Hartsdale, New York. 10,000 pets are buried there. Elephant graveyards. There's actually an elephant graveyard in Thailand, opened back in 1995. They don't bury the whole elephant here. It's a protected animal for them. They bury the animal somewhere else. Then when the meat's all gone, they move the bones and bury the bones here, which I thought was just weird and amazing. And apparently there's hundreds of them out here. Dinosaur graveyard. There is such a place. It's in Tacoma Bluff. It's near Medicine Bow, Wyoming. The Peabody, Smithsonian, American Museums all have skeletal remains from this particular area. That's kind of cool. I thought, what about water? Anything about water? Well, they're found in lakes and rivers and oceans. Sometimes a lake is created and cemeteries below it, but Neptune Memorial Reef in Florida, the Katarman Sunken Cemetery in the Philippines. Those are pictures of those. There's a floating cemetery in Hong Kong. It's called the Columbarium. Yes, it really floats. The last weirder one is there's one called the Spacecraft Cemetery. It's actually in the uninhabited area of the South Pacific Ocean. It's the resting place of unwanted and useless spacecraft. Okay. Coffins and caskets, the biggest casket maker. Apparently back in the 1890s, I think it was, up until 1901-ish or 1909, was this gentleman here, St. Louis Coffin Company. And it made $1 million by advertising at the World's Fair in 1904. Different types of caskets. It's exponentially grown, of course, since the past 150 years. Batesville Casket Company is now the biggest one, and that was formed in 1884. The one on the lower right, they even make them that are biodegradable now. Because you can get buried with trees and roots and everything else. So if you drive through any cemetery, you're going to see writings and poems and stuff. But epitaphs. Epitaphs are kind of interesting. A couple of famous ones are "Free at Last," Martin Luther King. "That's all, folks," Mel Blanc. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Edgar Allan Poe. Well, there goes the neighborhood. Rodney Dangerfield. How about Game Over? That was Michael Leroy Pac-Man Luther. But I think these two I've got up here are really great epitaphs, especially toward the end of my lecture here. And the last one is 999, which I told these guys a while back, but it's actually an angelic number. It's associated with graveyards. It's a reminder that the Lord and the angels are protecting you. So no matter where you are, if you think of 999, you're being protected. So with that, this concludes my Boneyards lecture. I thank you guys for hanging out with me for the last, 2-3 days, whatever it was. And I appreciate your time, and thanks for having me.